All right, gotta say, cracking open a new field manual sometimes feels like, prepping for a dentist appointment. Necessary, sure. Thrilling, not so much. But this deep dive, this is going to be different. Trust me. We're diving into ADP 319, Chapter 3, Integrate Army, Multinational, and Joint Fires. We're talking about how the Army brings the heat. And not just, when it's time to light them up.
The really interesting thing here is the doctrine, it goes way beyond just see target, engage target. It's about like weaving firepower into every single phase of an operation. I mean, from the second you get that mission brief all the way to that final after-action report.
So we're not just talking about the guys on the firing line here, right?
Yeah.
This is about every leader at every level understanding how fires fit into the bigger picture. Right?
Yeah, you got it. ADP 319, it ties this directly back to ADP 5.0, which, as you know, is the Army's playbook for how we plan and execute operations. Think about it. Fires, they impact how you plan your movement, how you use the terrain, even how you protect your own troops.
Right, of course.
And that means we got to think about fire support planning, airspace control, how we're going to use the electromagnetic spectrum. Heck, even air and missile defense comes into play.
Wow. Okay, so it's like this whole other level of coordination running in the background of everything you do. No pressure, right?
Well, and that's where you come in as a leader. See, this integration, this symphony of destruction, you could say, it all starts with how well you understand the battlefield, how you want to use every single resource you've got to accomplish your mission.
Okay, so it's not enough to just like leave it to the fire support officer and, cross your fingers, hope for the best.
Not a chance. This chapter, it really hammers home the point that the scheme of fires, it's like a sculptor's chisel, It shapes the entire battlefield to your advantage. And you, as the commander, you're the one holding that chisel.
I like that. It's not just about reacting to the enemy. It's about, like, proactively setting the terms of the fight.
100%.
And a huge part of that, I imagine, is understanding your area of operations, your AO, as we all know it.
Yeah, absolutely. But, and here's where it's even more interesting, you got to understand the difference between your AO and your area of influence.
Okay, so remind me, what's the difference again?
So think of it like this. Your AO is what you own, right? The ground you're responsible for.
Right, got it.
But your area of influence, that's how far your reach actually is, particularly with your firepower.
Okay, so let me see if I'm following you. Let's say my unit is tasked with securing this village. That's my AO.
Right.
But my mortars, they only have the range to cover, we'll say, half of that area.
Okay.
So my area of influence is smaller. Even though my responsibility securing the whole village, well, that hasn't changed. That sounds like a recipe for trouble.
Exactly. You're responsible for that whole village, but you can only realistically influence half of it with the weapons you've got. I mean, that's like trying to fight a bar brawl with one arm tied behind your back. You are going to be at a serious disadvantage.
And within that AO, you've got a million things to juggle, right? I mean, you got the terrain, you got movement, you got to protect civilians, got to keep your own guys safe. The list goes on and on and on. And that's where those control measures come in, right? Those lines on the map that everybody loves to hate.
They're lifesavers, more than just lines on a map, that's for sure. Control measures, both permissive and restrictive, that's how you impose order on the chaos of battle,
Right.
They tell everyone where they can go, where they can shoot, how all the pieces fit together, and they're absolutely crucial for preventing friendly fire and making sure the right firepower hits the right target at the right time.
So it's like you're creating these, clear lanes, even in the fog of war, so you can, unleash hell without accidentally taking out your own guys.
Exactly. And don't forget, we're not just talking about, tanks and artillery here. Think about airspace. With those airspace control measures or even cyber in space, they operate under a whole different set of rules.
It's wild to think that something you do that seems, local, like jamming a radio signal, that could have ripple effects in the cyber domain and impact operations miles away. It's like, what's that? The butterfly effect thing, but with a lot more explosions.
You're hitting on a critical point. What might seem like a localized action can have massive strategic consequences.
Yeah.
We're talking about a level of interconnectedness that, frankly, we've never seen before in warfare.
So we've got all these different pieces in play, all these different domains, like you said, and the stakes.
They couldn't be higher. Right.
So that's got to be where preparation, real preparation, becomes like mission critical, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about, checking your weapon, making sure you've got enough ammo. This
You're
is,
talking about mental readiness.
yeah, exactly.
Like a football team,
Yeah,
taking the field without even practicing the plays.
right.
You're just going to get crushed by the competition.
Yeah.
In ADP 319, it's big on rehearsals, breaks them down into 4 types, each one building on the last.
And it all starts with those back briefs,
Okay.
right? Which I got to say, I think a lot of leaders, they see those as just a formality.
Right.
Like, okay, I got to issue the orders, make sure everyone's got the plan, and we're moving on. But this chapter, it really emphasizes that it's so much more than that.
Oh, absolutely. A good back brief, it isn't just about telling your team what to do. It's about making sure they understand the why.
Okay, yeah.
Why are we taking this objective? Why are we using this type of fire support? What happens if the enemy does, X, Y, or Z? You want your team thinking critically, not just blindly following orders.
It's about empowering them to, make decisions on the fly when the situation changes, which it always does.
Exactly. And once you've got everyone on the same page strategically, then it's time to bring in the different players. That's where those support rehearsals come in.
Right. And this is where, even if your main focus is on, say, maneuver or logistics, the doctrine is very clear.
Mm.
Your fire support teams, they need to be in the room.
Yeah.
They need to be just as involved in that planning and rehearsal process as anybody else.
It's like a band practicing a new song.
Yeah.
The guitar, they might have the lead, right? But the drums, the bass, the vocals, they all have to be in sync for it to really work.
I like that.
And fire support, it's rarely the star of the show, but it's almost always playing this crucial supporting role.
Right.
And that needs to be practiced, just like any other maneuver.
And then we step it up another notch with those combined arms rehearsals.
Mm-hmm.
This is where all the pieces, they really start to come together.
Now you're cooking with gas. This is where you're syncing those fires with your movement. You're practicing those what-if scenarios, those branches and sequels, the ones that kick in if the enemy throws you a curveball.
And you see those control measures that we talked about earlier. They really come to life. I mean, that line on the map, it might seem kind of abstract when you're looking at it on paper, but when you're out there, you're rehearsing your movement, and you see that, hey, artillery is going to be dropping rounds right on the other side of that line. It really hits home how important that coordination really is.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about those battle drills. It's easy to think of those as purely physical, right? Like react to contact, breach an obstacle, things like that. But ADP 319 makes it clear, your technical drills, just as important.
Especially when it comes to communication. Right?
Oh, 100%.
I mean, if your radio's down or your comms plan has holes in it, none of this other stuff even matters. You're operating blind at that point.
Yeah.
That's why rehearsing your comms, making sure everybody knows how to use their equipment, how to get a message through, even when they're taking fire, I mean, that's absolutely essential.
In the heat of the moment, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall back on your training. And that applies to your comms just as much as it does to your marksmanship or, your battle drills.
For sure.
But here's the thing. How do you know if you've gotten this right? How do you measure whether or not you've effectively integrated fires into your operations? That's where assessment comes in.
And we're not just talking about a debrief after the fact, right? Like, okay, let's sit down, have a PowerPoint, talk about what we could have done better. ADP 319, it's big on baking assessment into that whole process. You're constantly evaluating, adjusting, making sure you're on track to achieve those objectives.
Exactly. And this is where those terms you always hear, measures of performance and measures of effectiveness, they become really important.
Yeah, right.
A lot of people, they get those two mixed up. But they're actually pretty straightforward once you break them down.
Yeah, okay.
So think of it like this. Your MOPs, your measures of performance, those are like checking the boxes on your to-do list,
Yeah.
Did we engage that target with the right weapon system? Did we stay within our rules of engagement? Did we hit the timeline that we set for ourselves?
You're measuring basically how well you're executing the plan.
Exactly. You're executing the plan. But those MOEs, your measures of effectiveness, that's about judging the impact of the plan itself.
So, did taking out that enemy bunker, did that allow our forces to advance as planned? Did destroying that bridge, did it actually disrupt the enemy's logistics chain?
You got it. You're looking at the bigger picture. Did we achieve the effects that we were going for?
Okay.
And that's where battle damage assessment, BDA, comes into play.
And this isn't just about, counting enemy bodies,
Okay.
right?
No, think of BDA like the doctor checking a patient after surgery,
Go ahead.
You're looking at the physical damage, sure, but you're also asking how well is the patient functioning? Are there any, hidden complications here?
Right.
BDA is about understanding the full impact of your actions on the enemy's ability to actually fight.
So it's about asking those tough questions. Do our fires have the intended effect? Do we need to hit that target again? Do we need to adjust our tactics, maybe even shift to a whole different plan?
Precisely. And ADP 319, it gives you this framework for doing that. It breaks BDA down into 3 core elements: the physical damage, how well the target is functioning after the strike, and then the overall impact on, the enemy's entire system.
So you're constantly checking the enemy's temperature.
Yeah.
How are they reacting to our moves? Okay, how do we adjust our game plan based on that?
Precisely. But all this talk about planning, rehearsing, assessing, it all leads up to, I think, the heart of it all, targeting. How do we take all this information and actually, put steel on target?
And thankfully, ADP 319, it doesn't leave us hanging. It gives us this really practical framework. They call it D3A: decide, detect, deliver, assess.
Right.
And it's not just some, abstract concept. This is something, honestly, that you're probably already doing, whether you realize it or not, every time you make a decision on the battlefield.
It's about taking those instincts, those gut feelings you have as a leader, and kind of channeling them through this more structured process. And it all starts with that first D, decide.
So before you even think about, calling for fire, you need to take a step back, really understand the why. Why are we engaging the enemy at this particular moment, at this particular place? What are we hoping to achieve here?
What are our objectives, right? Which targets are they absolutely essential to take out? Which ones can we maybe, bypass for now? Are there any rules of engagement, other restrictions that we need to factor in?
You got to have that clear understanding of the bigger picture before you start, dropping rounds.
Absolutely. And once you've made those decisions, then you move on to detect. This is where your intelligence gathering, your target acquisition, all that becomes absolutely paramount.
So you're not just waiting for targets to, kind of pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
You're actively hunting for them based on what you know about the enemy, the terrain, your own objectives.
Precisely. We're using every tool we've got, right? Scouts, drones, electronic warfare, you name it. We want to find those high-value targets, the ones that are going to make the biggest difference in the fight.
And once you've found them, well, then it's time for the fun part.
Yeah.
Deliver. That's where you match the right weapon to the target.
You got it. And we're not just talking about, can this howitzer reach that building? It's about, do we need to use it?
Right.
We're thinking about, what are the target's defenses? What's the surrounding environment? What's the potential for collateral damage? We want to use the most effective, most efficient weapon for that job while minimizing, those unintended consequences as much as possible.
So it's about using the right tool for the job to get the effects you want.
Exactly. And just as important as hitting the target is understanding what happens after the dust settles. And that's where assess comes in. Did we actually achieve the desired effect? Did our rounds land where we wanted them to? Did we neutralize that threat? Or did we just make them mad?
All right, so we can learn from it, right? And get it right the next time.
You got it. D3A, it's not a checklist that you run through once and then you forget about it. It's this continuous loop. It's a feedback mechanism that helps you adapt, helps you refine your targeting process in real time.
It's like playing chess.
Yeah.
You're constantly anticipating the enemy's next move, and you're adjusting your strategy based on what you're seeing out there on the board.
That's a great way to put it. But here's the thing, and you know this, as the Army, we're rarely operating alone these days. We're often part of this larger joint force working alongside the other services, and that's where joint targeting comes in. And it adds this whole other level of, complexity.
And ADP 319 is very upfront about this, right?
Yeah.
About to bridge that gap between, okay, here's how the Army does things, here's our D3A process, and then here's this broader joint targeting cycle.
Because now you're coordinating with the Marines, the Air Force, the Navy, each of them with their own capabilities, their own procedures, even their own lingo in a way.
Yeah.
It's like you've been playing, pickup basketball with your buddies, and then suddenly you're thrown onto an NBA court. You're trying to keep up with LeBron James.
Right, exactly.
And that's why things like, Joint Intermediate Target Development, JITD certification, it's so important.
Because we need to be able to speak the same language,
Yeah.
understand each other's processes,
Yeah.
make sure everyone's really on that same page.
You got it. And that goes for the information we're sharing, too. ADP 319, it talks about the importance of producing what they call accredited target material.
Okay, so break that down for me. What does that really mean?
So that's making sure that the intel we're gathering, the target packages we're putting together, they're accurate, they're complete, and they're formatted in a way that everyone in that joint force, they can understand it, they can use it.
Because the last thing you want is for, like, some critical piece of information to get lost in translation, right? That could cause it could jeopardize the whole mission.
Exactly. But speaking of threats, we can't talk about integrating fires without addressing, the elephant in the room, or, well, I guess the threat looming over the battlefield, enemy air and missile attacks.
Right. Got to keep your head on a swivel.
Always. It's a dangerous world out there, and those skies are getting a lot more crowded, and that's where air and missile defense comes in, AMD.
Right. And ADP 319, it's all about this layered approach to protection, right? It's not just about having the most advanced missile systems in the world. It's about using every tool you've got to create this, like, defensive umbrella.
Yeah, and it all starts with, like, identifying those assets that absolutely positively have to be protected. And that's where your critical asset list comes in, the CAL.
Right.
Think of it like your wish list, If you had unlimited resources, what would you protect?
Everything.
Right, exactly. But in the real world, we got to prioritize. You can't protect everything. So we focus on what's most essential. And that's where your defected asset list comes in, the DAL. It's a much shorter list, obviously.
Yeah.
It's based on what you can actually defend, with the forces you have, the resources that are available.
And this kind of defense, it really does take a village, right? It's not just about where you position, your Patriot batteries. It's about working with other units, other services to really create that layered defense.
Absolutely. You've got your early warning systems, your fighters, your surf-to-air missiles. They got to all be working together. And it's not all about, just blowing stuff out of the sky either. We've got passive defense measures, too.
Okay, so explain the difference there again between active and passive defense.
So active defense, that's your classic shoot it down before it hits us approach. Passive defense, it's more about, reducing your vulnerability in the first place.
Okay, yeah, got it.
So things like camouflage, concealment, maybe hardening your structures to withstand attack, even just dispersing your forces so they're not all bunched up in this one, easy target.
Right, makes sense.
And just like with everything else we've talked about today, rehearsals, they are absolutely critical.
Even for those, you're talking about some highly technical AMD crews, right?
Especially for them. Because when those alarms go off, seconds count. You don't want it to be the first time those crews are working together, under that kind of pressure. They need to know their systems, their comms, their procedures, inside and out.
Because a single mistake, that could be the difference between, a successful defense and, a catastrophic loss.
That's the reality of modern warfare. The stakes are high, and that margin for error, it's razor thin.
Which is why I think this deep dive into ADP 319, Chapter 3, it's been so valuable.
Yeah.
It really drives home the point that integrating fires, it's so much more than just, lobbing artillery shells or calling in airstrikes.
It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking about the battlefield that impacts really every decision you make as a leader.
It's about weaving that firepower into every single aspect of your operations, right? From the initial planning stages all the way through to, like you said, assessing the aftermath of an engagement. And it's about never stopping learning. Never getting complacent.
Because we all know the enemy isn't standing still.
Exactly. So to all you listeners out there, keep seeking out those training opportunities, those chances to work with other units, especially from the other services.
The more you sweat in peacetime, the less you bleed in war, right?
Exactly.
And as you continue to hone your craft as leaders, I want you to think about this. How are you going to shape the future of integrated fires for the U.S. Army?
That's a great question, and one that hopefully this deep dive has given you some tools to start answering. Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay safe out there, and remember, knowledge is power.